Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Big Bros podcast. My name is Ilan, and I'm joined by my lovely friend and co-host, Jeremy. How are we?
I'm well, mate. How are you going?
Pretty good. I cannot complain. I'm super pumped to get into this episode. Would you love to tell our lovely listeners what we're going to be chatting about today?
Yeah, well, we know that you guys love the dating and the relationship-esque type episodes. So that is what we've got in store for you today. We're talking about what it's like to date someone secure. I mean, there's so much on the internet about anxious attachment and people that are insecure, but we want to spin the wheel and say this is what it's like to actually be dating someone secure, so that when you come across someone secure out there, you know that they are not going to stuff you around. You're with the right person, and you should absolutely pursue that person, assuming that you've done the work yourself, you're secure within yourself, and together you guys are just going to be a power couple. What do you reckon is the first point, the first indication to know when someone is truly secure within themselves?
Well, I think if you know that when you're dating them, you know where you stand. There's no questions in your head as to whether you're a sneaky link for them or whether you're a long-term partner for them. You're not ruminating on what could be. You just know. And I think that's the cool thing about it, is you don't have a gut feeling telling you that there's something not sitting right. And I think this point doesn't have to actually be that complicated. You know where you stand because A, they've probably communicated to you where you stand, and B, you just have that feeling. I mean, like, have you been in situations before where you just knew that it wasn't going to work out? You were questioning, they weren't giving you the reassurance you needed, and you felt like, you know what, they were probably an insecure attachment style or whatever it is, but you just didn't know where you stood with them.
Yeah, and I think that comes from the mixed signal point that we make here. It's you want to know where you stand, and that comes from not having those mixed signals. And I always come back to the texting game, because the texting game is something that, we're all too familiar with in those early stages of getting to know someone, even the first month or so. If they're leaving you undelivered for extended periods of time, if there's a million and one excuses as to why they haven't gotten back to you, like, they stubbed their toe in the wall and they've been wincing in pain for the last 8 hours, or their dog accidentally ate something from the park and they've been attending to it for the last 24 hours and therefore haven't responded to you. Some rubbish excuse, even though, they're all valid within their own rights, but maybe not for that extended period of time. If there's some rubbish excuse there, that is another mixed signal, right? And we've always said on this podcast before that toxic games bring toxic relationships. And that starts from the get-go when you're communicating someone over the phone, through text, through calls. If it's not like a tennis match, if you're not getting back to each other in due course, and that doesn't mean you need to be spamming each other on your phones day in, day out, but you should go to bed at night knowing where you stand with that person. You shouldn't go to bed thinking, oh my God, like, I don't know whether they're going to respond to me. Why has it been so long? I'm getting back to them, but they're always taking a lot longer. The right person, and when I say the right person, a secure person, will show their true intentions with you, whether it's over the phone, whether it's through text, whether it's through voice messages. You will know where you stand with that person because they will get back to you in due course. And if they're not interested, they'll let you know about that as well.
I think that's the true marker of a secure person. They're able to actually communicate what they want without the need to put in a hidden message or something toxic, right? Like, they're going to tell you how it is. They're going to call a spade a spade. And I think in today's dating culture, we're so afraid of what the other person's going to think. I think so many times, and we've had chats with our friends where a lot of times they're almost insecure about what their partner thinks or who they're seeing thinks about them or what they think about them. But at the same time, I always like to ask them, what do you think about them as well? Like, why does it have to be always what they think about you? Why are we pedestalizing this person? They're your equal, ultimately. They're a human being. They go to the toilet like you go to the toilet,
Yeah.
right? Like, the reality is, if you really just look at it, it should be an equal playing field. And that means that you're qualifying them as much as they're qualifying you. And by an extension of that, I think also just coming back to that point, being able to actually communicate where you want to be in that relationship, right? Whether it's, you're already 6 months into dating, whether you're only a few weeks into dating and you're seeing some potential grow. The point being is that you want to feel confident enough to have that conversation where you say like, look, I want to know where this is headed. I want to know where things stand. And if you feel as though having that conversation with them might be quite uncomfortable, then, and maybe that's because there's a gut feeling that's telling you they're not going to respond well. They're not going to give you the answer you want. Chances are that first point isn't really being satisfied. And A, either you're not the one who's secure in that relationship, or B, they might not be.
With that point, I think it's about asking yourself, are you scared of having the conversation because you're scared of the conversation? Or are you scared of having that conversation because you're scared of what they are going to respond to you with? If you're just scared about having that conversation, I think that is the more positive approach to the situation, because those conversations can be a bit, tough and vulnerable in the early stages of dating someone. You're letting your guard down, and naturally there can be a few fears when having that conversation. But if you're scared to have that conversation because you're scared of what that person might respond with, you're scared that they might hit you with a rejection, or you don't know where they kind of stand, then that's different. That means that you yourself know that you're getting a vibe that they aren't really communicating well with you, or they're not really giving you the signals that they're into you, maybe as much as you're into them. So I think that's where that discrepancy lies, because, I've entered conversations in the past where, you have that what are we type of conversation. But, I know within myself that if, I'm quite secure in myself and I'm with someone that is quite secure in themselves as well, whether that conversation is, a bit fearful to bring up or not, because you are letting your guard down, I still know that, okay, it'll go well to whatever extent that may be, because the person I'm having it with is seemingly a secure person. They're not giving me those mixed signals.
Agreed. And that doesn't only have to apply in the early stages of dating. If
it should be applied throughout your whole duration of dating.
The context is just going to be different.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're 3-4 years down the line and you're looking, you might not be thinking about marriage per se, but you want to almost communicate to them that you're not here to fuck spiders. You're here to potentially grow and cultivate this relationship into something bigger that could grow into marriage. You two should be on the same page as that, right? We've spoken so much about sunk cost fallacy and why it's such a big reason why people stay in unhappy and dissatisfying relationships. But the reality is, at the same time, is you want to feel like you're on the same page with that partner. Like if you have a doubt about, potentially entering something even long-term with them, I think it's on you to examine why that doubt's there and so forth. But, that you two should largely be on the same page with future direction, and you should be having those conversations. I'm not saying they have to be frequent, but there should be that, as much as there should be an unset understanding, there should be also a set understanding. You should have that ability to communicate with your partner about these things, because the reality is, and this brings me up to point number 2, a huge sign and indicator that a person is secure is that their words and their actions align. They're not all talk. If in the early stages of dating, or maybe you've asked them to be, you put the boyfriend, girlfriend label on, and they've always said to you throughout that dating process how much they want you to meet their parents and how much you believe that you're going to get along. But, when the time comes, they're shrugging it off, they're ducking all the opportunities, and there's no kind of reasonable excuse as to why, and they're just shrugging off what they promised to you. That's a clear example where words and actions do not align. And
when it comes to actions as well, that doesn't mean always saying yes to the offer and to the opportunity as well, because there are going to be times, more often than not, if you got your busy schedules, you got a million things that you need to do in the day, where you won't be able to maybe go to that dinner or see your partner that night or see the person that you're dating. But is that person offering another opportunity to then see you as well? Are they saying, sorry, I can't do tonight, but they're giving an opportunity to do something on another day? They're offering the Tuesday evening to catch up because they can't catch up on the Sunday. That is another great example of where their actions align. They're very intentional with wanting to see you versus just saying, sorry, can't do so, maybe next time. Where you stand with them. Their actions are aligning with their words, whether they can see you or speak to you in that time, or whether they can't. You know when that next opportunity will come with them. You know when that next date might be.
You know why that situation really annoys me? When like, and this doesn't have to apply to intimate relationships, but like even like friendships, right? When you're trying to organize like a time to hang out and they pull the, oh, I'm busy that day, and then they don't actually offer an alternative day, or they're really, really vague. That just shits me off, because you may as well just say, I don't want to see you.
Well,
Or
that's
it's like,
right.
Just have the balls in this case, you know, don't waste any of our time, because the reality is there's emotional investment. And obviously that doesn't actually happen that frequently in friendships, but it can happen quite a bit in romantic relationships. And I think we're so afraid of sharing our truth in fear of, you know, how the other person's going to perceive us. And I reckon sometimes we're so scared to burn those bridges, even though it's doing that person a favor, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that transitions us into point number 4 as well, where when it comes to receiving love, when it comes to feeling love, you know that you don't need to chase that person. You know that that person can feel loved within who they are. They already love themselves. And that's where the whole adage of, you know, you need to learn how to love yourself before loving someone else comes into play. You know that this person, they seem to have a pretty strong level of self-love and self-care about themselves. They look steady, they're reliable, they do things out of desire because they truly want to do them. They're showing that. They're showing up in the way where, you know, they're not upset if something you do doesn't match what they might have wanted in that situation. They see things from a very rational perspective, and they don't get butthurt when things don't go their way. They don't take it to heart. And that, I think, is another key example of someone that is secure, seeing that they can be loved with or without really you in the picture, because they've got that sense of self. And that's one of the fucking hottest things you can have in a person.
Definitely, it can, because, you know, codependency not happening here, mate.
Nah.
Like, you know, if you've got that love for yourself and you've got that sense of aura about you, like, I would love to, you know, contribute to that sense of aura without it being a codependent dynamic.
It's an infectious energy to be around someone that you can just tell straight away that they have that sense of that sense of love for themselves. And when I say love, it's not narcissism. It's just this feeling of, or this sense of, they're confident within their own skin. You know, they know what they stand for. They speak with a sense of belief in what they say and what they do. It's a bit of that not giving a fuck what other people think. And they know that no one can kind of get in their way because of that. And that can be picked up on, I think, early in conversations as well with people.
I reckon so as well. And I think another reason it shows that they're actually secure is because, back to that point, you said it's not narcissism. It's definitely not narcissism, but it's because they know that they're enough. People who are narcissistic deep down don't believe they're enough. That's why they try to have all these behaviors that almost inflate their sense of self-worth, so others perceive them as this god, right? But these people who are secure, they just feel like they're enough, which means that you don't need to feel like you're always chasing them in order for them to give you love. You don't need to always give them validation and affection in order for them to express their love freely, because they know they're enough, which means that if they choose to express their love, they're confident in that behavior. They're not doing it because they want necessarily solely your validation, but they're so confident in themselves that they can do it freely and with no kind of concerns about what the outcome might be. Of course, they'd obviously want you to reciprocate that for sure, but at the same time, it's like they're so confident in their love that it's not erratic, right? It's there, it's natural, it's organic, it's not done because they feel obligated to give it. And I think that's a huge one as well. I'm a huge believer, and a lot of people might disagree with me, but I'm a huge believer that if they wanted to, they would. And that's the truth.
That's a trendy thing going around right now.
I think it truly is. Look, there's obviously going to be extenuating circumstances in life that sometimes prohibit us from doing something or seeing someone, right? Like, but I'm saying that, you know, for the majority of things, if something's really, really important to you, you will make time for it. And if that's a person, people will get out of bed and drive hours to see a loved one when they're in distress. So the reality is, people are willing to do it if they want to do it. If there's enough want in them, they will do it. But there's a difference between them wanting to do it and them feeling obligated to do it, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think we should ever shit on someone for not wanting to do something, right? It's like love. You can't magically turn someone into loving you, right? You can't make them feel obligated to love you.
And why would you want that anyway?
Correct.
Why would you want to have to persuade someone to love you?
Exactly. And the organic thing there is like, we spoke about this like Danny last week, Danny Kennedy, great episode. Everyone should definitely check that episode out. But it's like, it's just becoming detached from the outcome as well. It's shaping your reality is by shaping who you're being in the current moment, right? And I think when it comes to things like love and wanting to do something, these are organic feelings.
Yeah.
They're best left. And it's like, for example, when you plant a tree, right? You're not going to keep watering that plant and hoping that it's going to grow and grow. It takes time, right? You water the plant, you go home, you do your own thing. Maybe a few days later, you water it again. And you just know it's going to grow, right? Because you're not overly obsessed. You're not staying there by the plant trying to water it every 2 seconds. You're not contemplating, oh my God, is my plant going to die? Is it going to grow? You just have this faith that if I'm going to water it, it's going to grow.
That's called simping over the plants. And we all know if you're just simping over your relationship constantly, if you're watering that way too much, you're not going to get any growth. You're just going to drown it, aren't you?
Exactly. Another way that you see a lot of secure people rock up in relationships is that they actually stick it out through the difficult times. They don't bail when things get difficult. They don't say, you know what, I don't want to be a carer for you, I'm out of here. I mean, you hear some obviously lovely and touching stories online where one partner gets diagnosed with a really bad chronic illness, and that partner who they're with has the option to leave them because maybe they want a better life, maybe they don't want to be relegated to being their carer. And you know what, like no one would
relegated.
Well, no one would begrudge
down to the championship from the Barclays Premier League.
Exactly. I didn't mean it like that. But in the sense of like, instead of just being their partner now, maybe they're with someone who is still quite young, and then that identity shift from being their partner has now changed to also being their carer. And no one would begrudge them for leaving. Maybe they're young and that's not how they imagine to live their life. But you can't deny how secure they are as a person if they're willing to show up for them during those difficult times. And, you hear these stories online where this does happen and then, they miraculously survive their illness, all the treatments, and that partner was with them for the entire period, and then they live happily ever after, right? And I think that's a really good example where people, when they're secure, when they know what they want, they're happy to, actually stick by those ideals. And if in that case, it might be like, I really love this person, and if they're going through a shit time, I'm going to be there with them every step of the way. And it obviously doesn't have to be, the extreme circumstances. It can be on the days where they're feeling anxious, they're feeling flat, they're just not feeling like themselves. They're still willing to rock up. And you know what that makes that person feel like? If I'm someone who is having a bad day and I can't show the best version of myself, but I know that the partner I'm with is there for it, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that just fills you up with so much confidence. And it's right back to point number one. I'll know where I stand with this person because I know that I can be authentically myself. I don't have to put this brave face on. I can show them my emotions. And I think a lot of people nowadays are sold this idea that, especially for young men, that we can't cry, we can't show our emotions in front of our girlfriends. And whilst I understand the idea why you want to kind of be stoic at times and you want to channel your emotions in healthy ways, I think there's something worse than that. I think it's like when you're trying to have that fake like understanding that, oh, nothing's bothering me, and you try to be this almost fake stoic guy, but people can see it through it. Your partners, your girlfriends can see through it. I think that's actually worse. You're almost better off letting out and shedding a few tears in that moment because you're at least being authentic. And guess what? If they're there for you in that moment, they'll probably respect you more because, first of all, it took strength to be vulnerable, but also you weren't being fake.
One thing about those difficult times, though, is that you got to be careful on pattern recognition. And this is something that I've learned from previous relationships as well, is that if the difficult times are very, very consistent to the point where there's a lot of like difficult times and things don't actually fill your cup up as much as maybe you thought they might, that's when a bit of reassessment needs to come into the situation, and where you got to self-reflect and think, okay, well, am I getting my cup filled up by this person as much as I'm filling their cup up as well? So I think, because I used to view this whole difficult times type thing as like, yep, no matter what, I'm always standing by that person. No matter how difficult it is, no matter how anxious they may be, no matter how doubtful they may be, I'm always standing by because that's what you do in difficult times, right? and I know this isn't what you're talking about in terms of your point about showing up in difficult times, but yeah, this is just a little side point I wanted to make, because I know from, past experiences as well, it's the point of, if there is a lot of difficulty to the point where it's actually taking away from who you are as a person, then you need to reassess that situation and think, okay, is this just a difficult time, or is this something that is reoccurring a lot, and maybe I need to bring this up with my partner?
That last point, maybe I need to bring this up with my partner. I'm not advocating that you stay with someone who's consistently negative and, takes your energy down. What I am advocating, if you are in a situation, and it's far more common than we think, where your partner is consistently negative, and there might be legitimate reasons, but it's at the point now where they're just venting to you and treating you like their therapist, it is probably a great opportunity then and there to reassure them and say, look, I'm there for you, but I'm not a professional, and I'm your boyfriend, or even if it's the opposite, I'm your girlfriend, I'm your husband, I'm your wife, whatever. I'm not your therapist though. That means that you need to go to someone professional to deal with this, because A, I'm not equipped for this, and B, I shouldn't be equipped for this, because, I'll be there for support, right? Like emotional support, reassurance, I'll be there for you. But, you feeling negative can be a contagious feeling. And I get that it might be legitimate, but the expectation shouldn't be for me to be on the receiving end of it always, because I've got needs in this relationship like you do. But that's not to say I'm going to leave you. That's just to say there needs to be a better way forward.
And that's what leads us to, I guess, our final point here about, respecting boundaries. This is a boundary that you've got for yourself, and you would absolutely hope that this person has boundaries for themselves as well. And a secure person will respect your boundaries. A secure person will invite a conversation like this, where you might be talking about difficult times, where you might be talking about progressions, where you might be talking about what your wants and needs are in this scenario. And they will hear you, and they will hear you, and they will listen to you, and they will listen to you without judgment. And you can feel that from a secure person. If this person that you're talking to is, just attentive to what you're saying, they're very much just letting you take the floor and talk without making judgments, without butting in and saying, but what about this, but I feel this, but I disagree, then that is a sign of not a secure person. If they're allowing you to take the floor, they're maybe questioning you, and they're actively listening and showing what they have heard from you and creating a discussion about it rather than creating an argument about it. That's when you know that this person is not just respecting your boundaries, but they're really emotionally equipped as well.
Jeremy, what do you think the biggest predictor of divorce is?
Probably lack of communication.
No, it's lack of sex actually, but I think lack of communication is definitely up there.
Is it actually?
Apparently so.
There you go.
So someone might need to fact check me on that, but I think I saw a couple of studies where that was cited as one of the reasons, for a whole heap of other things. But lack of communication or communication issues is a big reason that a lot of people end up splitting up, and it's because communication issues can arise when we don't understand how to effectively communicate to our partner. It's because we don't know how they want to be communicated to, what their sense of right and wrong is. And boundaries are an excellent way of communicating this, because boundaries tell the other person what you're okay with versus what you're not okay with. And it removes as much of that grey area as possible, because most people get into trouble in relationships when they enter that grey area, because they never put a red line or a green line. They just made that grey area as big as possible, to the point where I didn't know that you were not okay with it versus I knew you were okay with it. And then that's where a whole myriad of arguments can happen, right? Like, some people will get really shitty if their partner likes the opposite sex's photo on Instagram, right? For some people, massive big deal. For others, water off a duck's back. But until you have those conversations about boundaries, and that's a very specific example,
but it's a great one
because it's common, it's trendy, it happens a lot in the age of social media. Another one is a boundary for some people is that they don't want their partner to be friends with the opposite sex. For some people, ridiculous, controlling boundary. For others, it's a sign of respect, and amongst other things. But there's no wrong or right in my opinion. It's whatever works for that relationship. but at least have the conversation.
And a secure person will openly have that conversation. If a secure person tries to avoid the conversation, if a secure person tries to, backhand that conversation and say, that's just rubbish, why would you even suggest such a thing? Then that person is not a secure person, and you should really try to reassess what it is that you guys are doing, because communication is key with that.
And you know why secure people love boundaries, or why secure people will be willing to respect your boundaries? It's because they know that even if they were to break your boundaries and you may want to break up with them, that's not the reason they do it. They don't do it for your validation per se. It's because they believe in the value of boundaries in the first place. They believe in open and effective communication. They believe in transparency. And I think if you have those tenets of a relationship, you set yourself up quite well, because, if you know your partner's terms and conditions, you're far less likely to inadvertently break them.
And with boundaries as well, another key factor is the point of compromise as well, I believe, because having a boundary doesn't mean you cannot sway and do something else in certain scenarios. Like if your boundary is normally you must be asleep by 9 p.m. at night, and if your partner disrespects that, then there's going to be trouble. If you're so clear cut and set in stone with your boundaries, that's also destined for failure, I believe. You need to be adaptable, you need to be flexible, as long as, like we've said, it's communicated and it's reciprocated and it's invited. We know that boundaries, just like anything, it needs to be what you do, majority of the time. And it's just like, sticking to a diet, you want to be having the good foods 90% of the time. The junk food, you can have that 10% in moderation here and there throughout, your little bits and pieces, your little cravings. Same with boundaries. The compromises need to be there as long as you've got the foundation blocks, and that is respected.
And I reckon as long as you find your non-negotiable boundaries, you're not going to bend the boundary of, if you're in a monogamous relationship, I'm okay with you going out and being railed by a bunch of people. That's obviously going to be a breakage of one of those fundamental boundaries. But perhaps it's one of those things of I want to have alone time for 1 hour every week. You could probably renegotiate those terms at some point, especially if you want to have kids and other responsibilities come into life, because you just got to get clear cut on what's actually important to you. What is actually going to have a big deal on you versus what's not going to.
Absolutely. Mate, on that note, I think we've nailed some really key points here about what you can see in a secure person. So guys, if you are seeing these values in a secure person, absolutely, notice those things, because they don't come around all that often as well. And it's really nice to come across people that are secure in themselves and are giving you that sense of security as well. If you have enjoyed this episode, share it with someone that you believe needs to hear it as well. We can't stress that enough. And
too many
otherwise,
people settling in crappy relationships with insecure people,
horrible,
or avoidant people. And you know what? The reality is they could attract someone more secure in their life if they made these expectations a non-negotiable for them.
Exactly. Don't just be masked by looks, because some people can have 10 out of 10 looks, but they can be very insecure people as well. So, it's that whole adage of going for the bad guy versus going for the good guy. Sometimes that good guy is a good guy because he's actually a secure guy. And yes, he might not have those 10 out of 10 looks and tats and have that, that aura about him that the baddie 10 out of 10 bikey kind of guy might have. But, I guess that's just maturing and realizing what it is you truly want in a relationship, in a partner.
Love that. On that note, guys, see you next week.
Bye.